We'll kick things off with that story then in this half hour. There was a general decrease in the number of murders between October until December last year. Police Minister Senzo Mchunu today released the crime statistics for the third quarter. Mchunu says there are 4 provinces with high crime rates.
There are 4 provinces that are our albatross when it comes to policing and crime fighting, namely Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape, and Western Cape. They pose quite a challenge. They dominate criminality in the country. And these provinces coincide with where our metros are in the whole country, and also with they coincide with the density of our population. And therefore, they are our focus. And we're going to continue this year focusing on them in particular.
Mchunu says police are concerned by the increase in rape cases as well as the attempted murder of children.
It's an overall reduction in conduct crimes against women who are deeply concerned by the increase in attempted murder cases against children aged 0 to 17. This is an alarming development that calls for concerted effort to protect the most vulnerable members of our society. Additionally, rape cases have increased in KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga and the Free State, whereas other provinces have recorded decreases. This data serves as a stark reminder that gender-based violence remains a critical issue requiring intensified interventions.
Joining us now is senior lecturer in the Stellenbosch University Political Science Department. That's Dr. Guy Lamb. That's to unpack the crime statistics a little bit further released by the Department of Police earlier today. Doctor, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it. Look, we keep looking at these statistics and hope that something's changed. We can look and say, of course, small parts of it have altered, but has anything really given us a sense that we're getting better at dealing with crime?
I mean, it's a yes and no answer. I think it was really encouraging to hear the minister, because it was the sort of sense of recognizing that there are challenges, but also indicating what the police have done. And what we know from South Africa after, more than 30 years of sort of policing under democracy is that there are certain things that work and certain things that don't work. And from a policing point of view, one of the things that work is you've really got to focus on the high crime areas. So in South Africa, there's only about 20% of the policing precincts or areas account for 50% of violent crime. So if you focus on those sort of areas and address crime in those areas, then your overall crime will come down. So he was talking about that. I think it was also the Safer Festive Season operation, which the police traditionally run from sort of October through the sort of festive season into early January. It seemed as though the police were more strategic in the use of their resources there, being more targeted, focusing on those high crime areas. And because of this increased visibility, we've seen kind of a reduction in most categories of violent crime, but particularly murder, which is the most reliable one. So this is encouraging. But of course, crime is still at a very high level. But of course, it's not going to solve crime. The police are really just trying to prevent crime. And it's not the police's job to kind of prevent crime at a societal level. They're really just trying to kind of make sure that crime remains at certain levels, but they have a very difficult job doing that.
Yeah, but you spoke about visibility then as well. Then if that happens a little bit more, ultimately, as you said, you've noted a particular change. Should we be doing even more to bring it down even further?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is police visibility is really expensive. And, that's why we have quite a high police budget, but often that budget doesn't account for what we actually need doing. And what the problem is that, the police, in order to keep crime at certain levels and to keep it, at a stable level or trying to keep it come down, you have to spend a lot of money on keeping the police in those particular areas. And that's unsustainable, certainly in the budgetary environment that we have. So we really need to be looking at what is it about these high crime places that we need to be doing in addition to policing, so that doesn't cost us so much money from a policing point of view in 10 years' time. And a lot of that comes into the rest of government coming to sort of focus on those specific areas. And that's not really happening. And that's part of the problem we have there, is there are many of the kind of societal structural drivers of crime in these places, and they aren't being adequately addressed, and the police are there just to try and kind of keep the lid on.
How do we deal with gang-related violence? Is it because of a lack of intelligence, ultimately no longer understanding how gangs may have changed with the times or no longer work, etc.? Are we just too slow to react? What do you think?
Well, I mean, addressing gangs themselves as entities aren't necessarily problematic. It's when they become violent, that is when we really need to get worried. The government has this, for example, anti-gang, anti-gangsterism approach, which tries to deal with, we need to suppress, we need to arrest gangs and gangsters, where ultimately we should be dealing with the violence and criminality aspect of them. And dealing with the criminality is quite difficult. I mean, the police and the South African government has legislation to deal with organized crime. But when things become particularly violent is when gangs get hold of guns. And this is what we've seen in the past 15 years, where gangs have had, fairly extensive access to firearms and to ammunition. And if you really want to bring down the levels of gang violence, we really have to get a handle on illegal guns and ammunition, and we haven't. And the minister indicated it's something they're going to prioritize. The president indicated in his SONA that there's something they're going to prioritize, but didn't put clear plans on the table. So I think, for the next few months, I think we really need to start to see ideas on how to deal with this. The minister said he's open to people approaching him with ideas.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that we start doing something about guns.
You just spoke about the gun, and I want to focus on that as well a little bit more, if I may. Just the access to guns. Does that mean we need greater regulation, greater enforcement of how guns are then sold? Because gun laws perhaps may be a critical segment of South Africa's economy as well as country that we then need to look at a little bit more. Is that the case? Do you think we need to have stricter rules?
Well, it's part of the equation. When we look at gun use and guns used in violence, most guns that are used in sort of gang-related violence, for example, or in murders, typically are unlicensed or illegal guns. And so you need to be targeting those, but those come from specific sources. So they either have been smuggled into the country, which over the past 20 years or so, not that many have been smuggled in. During the sort of political transition period, there were some, but most of the guns that are used in crime in South Africa were internally sourced. So they were either sourced from licensed firearm holders through loss and theft, from the police, from the military, from private security, from other government departments that have access to firearms. And so, more than 20 years ago, we had firearms legislation, which really tightened things up. And then we saw reductions in gun violence happening because of that. And there's been an attempt to tighten up even further to try and close off loopholes, because there are certain categories of gun owners who are more vulnerable to losing their weapons or having them stolen from them. And so through legislation, government is trying to do something about it, but that legislation got blocked in Parliament. And so that's now sitting with the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Police, and it's something ideally they should be prioritizing. But also we should be looking at where are gangsters and other criminals getting their guns from? Is it predominantly from civilians, which the police say in the annual report? But also they do get them from police, also do get them from the military to a degree, and from private security, and to figure out those particular weaknesses and address them.
What about policing, community policing forums? I mean, law enforcement continues to emphasize the importance of community collaboration in fighting crime. There's a fine line between that and, of course, mob attacks that we've also seen, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal. How do we draw the line then and say to police, yes, you can involve the community, but there needs to be that careful stance as for them to not go into criminality?
I mean, the point around the Community Policing Forum, which was introduced, in the new dispensation in the 1990s, was really to be the sort of community liaison, the space where the police and members of the community can come together to talk about crime problems and come up with joint solutions. The problem is the police were unenthusiastic about that sort of model. They want the CPF, they want the CPF to do what the police want to do, rather than to take advice from the CPF and say, well, maybe we need to do things a bit differently. And the problem is because of that, some of the CPFs are really functional and some of them aren't. And where the ones are already functional and become this forum for community views, then the relationships between the police and the CPF work very well, and you see low levels of vigilantism. Where you don't have a strong CPF, where there's lots of challenges within a community, you tend to see poor levels of policing, you tend to see vigilantism. So the point is that we want to address vigilantism, we do need functioning CPFs. We also need police to be engaging with the community, to be responsive to community needs, to be seen to be doing their particular job. And in that way, we can kind of bring down those forms of vigilantism. Yeah,
we hope that can continue at this rate. You think that will continue to bring down violent crimes at the very least in 2024, fourth quarter? When one looks at how we were reporting on it, it doesn't feel like it dropped any further.
I mean, I think it's possible, and it's around having a conducive environment, and certainly under the current minister, we seem to be moving in that direction, where he's open to having conversations with people. Yeah. Of course, there are many of the societal drivers of crime. We're not going to be able to do much about that until government officially launches its integrated crime and violence prevention strategy, which supposed to bring all the different parts of government together to deal with the determinants of crime and violence. But certainly the way the policing are going, being more targeted, being more strategic, hopefully we will see, it looks as though we may see a continued reductions in crime in the next quarters.
We certainly are hoping so, because that's going to be quite important as well. Thank you so much for joining us then, Doctor, as well, then just to kind of give us a clearer sense of where we sit, why these crime stats, of course, are important, and how exactly they look moving forward as well. Those crime stats released by the Minister Senzo Mchunu.